Sorry. Okay. Okay. Unlawful insulation. That's of food. Of food, not making your place hot. Insulation. If one unlawfully insulated with a heat intensifying substance, the food may not be eaten if either A, the insulation caused further cooking which enhanced the food, B, the food was cold and the insulation warmed it. In case of necessity, one may eat the food provided that either A, the violation was unintentional, B, one forgot the halacha, especially if it was already fully cooked. C, the insulated food was intended for the daytime meal and the person doesn't regularly insulate such foods. And D, the insulation merely retained the heat of the food. And in brackets it says, if one insulated on Shabbos with a heat intensifying substance, the food might be forbidden, even if it merely retained the heat. And it says, if one unlawfully insulated with a heat maintaining substance on Shabbos, one may eat the food. Okay, and then heat intensifying. I thought it was actually foil, but it's not. Let's just another couple of seconds and when we're done. Following intensify heat, whether they are dry or moist: olive and sesame pomace, compost, salt, lime, sand. The following intensify heat only when they are moist, such as straw, grape pulp, tufts of soft materials, and grasses. Okay, let's leave it at that, because I thought it was actually going to say foil, but foil, when you cook with foil, if you're taking it back to the heat source, if obviously it's fully cooked, you can't seal it. I was doing that until recently. There has to be an opening that you can see the food in the container. Can't be completely sealed. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got to.
They had you completely foiled.
Yeah.
Cute. All right. So we're going to go through something new. I'm not quite sure where Gavin is. I think he's just picking up a package outside. Yes. So just while he's all, the legend is back.
The Kohen, the esteemed priest, the high priest.
Okay, Gav, we're getting started now, and we're not going to do revision today. You guys have chapter. Let's go to a new part of the Gemara. Can everybody hear me? Gav, you can hear me?
I can hear you. Sorry, I had to leave. I had to go just collect something for Brandon.
All right, let's get started. We're on the 73rd Daf and Aleph. So the Gemara suggests that the dispute between Abaye and Rava may actually be a Tanaic dispute. Okay, because remember the Amoraim. So the dispute that they have actually mirrors a Tanaic dispute. So because we learned in a brisa, if there were two witnesses testifying about him that he stole, and they themselves also testified about him that he slaughtered the stolen animal, and they were subsequently rendered conspiring witnesses, Eidim Zomimim, on the theft, their testimony, which has become partially invalidated, is totally invalidated. Now that's logical, guys, because although they were not exposed as Zomimim on the slaughter, their testimony regarding the slaughter is automatically invalidated, because if there's no proof that the defendant stole the animal, he can't be held liable for the slaughtering penalty that's attached to the thievery penalty. So the defendant is therefore exempt, while the first witnesses have to pay the twofold payment for being Zomimim regarding the theft. So obviously they do not have to pay the threefold payment for the slaughter, because they had not been proven to be Zomimim on that. And you want to say, guys, maybe there was a second set of witnesses that saw that they lied about the slaughter because they could prove they were not there, the first set of witnesses, on the day they said the slaughter took place. It doesn't matter. Even if they were subsequently exposed as conspiring witnesses on the slaughter portion, they're not liable to the threefold payment because their hazama, which is the reciprocal penalty on the theft, already rendered their testimony regarding the slaughter irrelevant. Because at the point where they were proven false witnesses regarding the theft, according to Rashi, it disables any testimony that they could have about the slaughter. So it doesn't matter whether they were proved to be false witnesses regarding the slaughter, or whether or not they're witnesses that came to, that never disputed that a slaughter took place. There's no slaughter payment if they're found to be Adam Zomimim on the theft. And they just have to pay the double careful payment for being caught out lying about their whereabouts with regards to the theft. So that's why the Gemara says their testimony, which became partially invalidated on the theft, is totally invalidated when it comes to the slaughter. If, however, they were rendered Adam Zomimim, conspiring witness on the slaughter, but not on the theft, the defendant pays the twofold payment. Why? Because although the witnesses were exposed as conspiring on the slaughter portion, their testimony regarding the theft remains valid. There weren't witnesses that came to testify that the first set of witnesses didn't witness the theft, because whether or not they didn't, the first set of witnesses made a statement that they saw the theft, and unless other witnesses come to bring evidence to the contrary, the defendant must pay the double payment for stealing the animal. Okay, so all we are saying there is, guys, again, if they were rendered Zomimim on the slaughter part but not the theft, the defendant still has to pay the twofold payment, because we're saying there isn't been any evidence to the contrary that the first set of the witnesses were lying, by a second set saying that they were in a different place regarding the theft. So if the first set of witnesses said this person stole, even though they were found to be Zomimim on the slaughter, we've got no evidence that they were Zomimim regarding the theft. So that's why the defendant pays the twofold payment. But the Adam Zomimim pay the threefold payment, because that's only when their testimony regarding the slaughter was discredited, but the testimony regarding the theft remains valid, and we hold the accused liable for the double payment. So how does this reflect the Tanaic dispute? Is because if we go back and we say Rav Yossi said, in regard, what was this last ruling said? In other words, that only when their testimony regarding the slaughter was discredited, their testimony regarding the theft remains valid, as we hold the accused liable for the double payment because there's no witnesses to the contrary. But it's said in context to a very specific rule in regard to two sets of witnesses, one testifying to the theft and another set of witnesses testifying to the slaughter. Okay, which is what we learned yesterday. And that was an Amorite discussion. That wasn't a Tanaic discussion. So this is mirroring that discussion. But in regard to one set of witnesses who testified to both the theft and the slaughter, we say that even though they were found to be Zomimim only on the slaughter, their testimony, which becomes partially invalidated, is totally invalidated, which is what we said yesterday. In other words, their testimony regarding the theft is also invalidated, and the accused is exempt from paying anything. Why? Because if you've got one set of witnesses, it's a very different case. Because generally when they're found to be corrupt, you can pretty much think that they might be corrupt and lying about other testimony. But when there are two sets of witnesses and other witnesses come to testify one of the sets of witnesses, who's to say that the other witnesses were lying? So we're saying that this Tanaic dispute seems very, very similar according to Rav Yossi's opinion. Okay. So a simple reading of Rav Yossi's statement suggests here that basically Rav Yossi is differentiating between testimonies regarding the theft and the slaughter given by two different sets of witnesses and testimonies in comparison to the theft and slaughter being given by one set of the same witnesses. Okay, So the Gemara, however, proceeds to demonstrate that the simple interpretation of Rav Yossi's statement cannot be correct. Okay. So, look, basically, where they were given by two different sets of witnesses, Rav Yossi would agree that the hazama, the reciprocal penalty of the witnesses to the slaughter, doesn't invalidate the testimony of witnesses to the theft. But if both testimonies were given by the same set of witnesses, it would seem Rav Yossi would hold that once their testimony regarding the slaughter is exposed as false and conspiring, it's invalidated, guys. So their testimony regarding the theft is also invalidated, even if the two testimonies were given at different times. So that's going one step further than the Amorite dispute yesterday. So the Gemara is having a bit of a problem with it. It's saying it can't be correct. Why? Because what does Rav Yossi mean when he says two sets of witnesses? And what does he mean when he says one set of witnesses? So if you're going to take it literally, guys, and say that, if you will say that the two sets of witnesses means literally two separate sets of witnesses, and one testifies about the theft and another set of witnesses testify about the slaughter, and then his definition of one set of witnesses means a single group of witnesses who testified to both crimes, the theft and the slaughter, but the testimony is coming one after another. In other words, at separate times. So, for example, you've got one set of witnesses, and on a Tuesday, they come to court and make a statement that the defendant stole the animal on Sunday, right? And then they came to the court on Wednesday, completely different day, and testified on Wednesday that he slaughtered the animal on Monday. Now, just to bring what Kevin said yesterday, not to add confusion, is, Kevin, it doesn't matter if the perpetrator or the defendant actually committed crimes on two separate days. The ick of what matters here is when the witnesses came to testify. Because as Gavin said yesterday, if they come in one utterance, even if they say in one statement, so we hereby swear, Your Honor, that he stole the ox on Sunday, and then we found out and we saw that he slaughtered it on the Monday, that's still one testimony regarding two separate days of events. That's absolutely fine, but it's still seen as one utterance, as Gavin quite clearly pointed out. But your question, Kevin, yesterday was good, because it has nothing to do with how many days the incident occurred over. It has to do with how many times the witnesses actually testify in court. Is it seen as one single testimony, or is it seen as two separate testimonies? So the problem that the Gemara is saying is that Rav Yossi is saying that if there's only one set of witnesses, like a single group of witnesses testifying to both the theft and the slaughter, one testimony coming after each other, when they testify to the theft and then later to the slaughter, when they're rendered zonamim on the slaughter, we say that their testimony, which has become partially invalidated, is totally invalidated, and they're rendered conspiring witnesses on the theft as well. But this can't be. Why, guys?
I thought that was actually clever. That I would have agreed with him.
Okay.
I'm just giving you my comment. I thought that, because I think that it's retroactive, so to go back, it makes sense, because they're lying on the first, and you can't believe them on anything after that. So I'm just using logic, not necessarily what we did yesterday. Just using logic. That
Okay.
If they lie on the second one, then obviously you can't trust them on the first one, and it's also retroactive because it's retroactive as well.
Okay, so I think that's a good point. Is that basically we're trying to see where Rav Yossi is holding, because according to that first statement, if that's the case, then a buyer agrees with Rav Yossi. We don't say Rav Yossi agrees with the buyer. Why? Because a buyer came after Rav Yossi. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So what we're saying then is a buyer agrees with Rav Yossi that says exactly as Gavin said, that if it's one set of witnesses and they have two separate testimonies, then if they're caught out lying in the one, and we see this retroactive disqualification, Why would you believe him on the other thing? It's a good point. But if you've got two separate sets of witnesses and one set of witnesses is caught lying, who says the other witnesses are caught lying unless you've got evidence to it? It's a good point, Gavin. But we're saying there's a problem with it if you see it in that definition. And the problem with it is this, is that when the Hazama witnesses come and say to the original witness, you could not have seen the slaughter, let's say on Monday, because we said the theft took place on a Sunday. And for this argument's sake, or example, we said the slaughter took place on a Monday. And if they said, oh, you couldn't have seen the slaughter, you were with us on Monday at Hyde Park, they rendered them zomamim in regard to the testimony they gave about the theft on Sunday as well. Okay, so the problem is you can't necessarily say that, because as the Gemara is about to say, but this cannot be, for what basis is there for saying this? What do they mean? Is that, how do you derive this? Because I know that one would think that they would be lying. But just because they lied about the whereabouts on Monday doesn't prove that they lied about the whereabouts on Sunday. In other words, what is determined as lying in the court system? That if witnesses come and prove to the contrary. We can't make assumptions. That's what Rava would be saying. That you can't necessarily make assumptions. You could say it's likely, but you would need evidence, Gavin. That's exactly the problem. So then we have to re-understand Rav Yossi's interpretation, according to the Gemara. He's saying, rather, when does Rav Yossi speak of two sets of witnesses, he must be referring to one set of witnesses that's like two sets. What do you mean one set of witnesses that's like two sets? So it's like Gavin said yesterday. It's one group of witnesses that testified about the theft and slaughter, with one testimony coming one after another. In other words, at two different times. Accordingly, Rav Yossi is saying that if they're found to be zomamim regarding the slaughter, their own earlier testimony regarding the theft is valid. But if there was only one set of witnesses, in other words, one witnesses that testified at one juncture regarding the theft and slaughter, and they were exposed to zomamim regarding the slaughter, their testimony regarding the theft does not remain valid. So what we are saying in a nutshell, guys, is pretty easy. Is that the interpretation isn't as crass as saying if there's two sets of witnesses and one set of witnesses regarding the slaughter is thrown out, is basically they're caught out at not being in that location. Kev, shame you're falling asleep, you're tired. Okay, so Kev, we've got two sets of witnesses. So that's not a chiddush. If a second set of witnesses come, if a third set of witnesses come against the second set testifying to the slaughter and say that they couldn't have seen the slaughter because they were with us in Yovel, then obviously the two witnesses testifying to the slaughter is cancelled and they have to pay the threefold payment to the innocent defendant. But the first defendants, there's no witnesses that are saying that they were in another place, and therefore the thief, unless he's proven otherwise, pays the double payment. So that's not an issue. Then we said, well, then obviously Rav Yossi is talking about one set of witnesses that talk about the theft and the slaughter. And therefore, as Gavin said, if they're found to be uncredible witnesses with regards to the slaughter, we don't trust them in terms of the theft. So the Gemara is saying that, okay, I can get that from a biased point of view, but the thing of it is the Gemara said it's more subtle than that. Rav Yossi is talking about something that you wouldn't take for granted, and that is what, when he talks about two sets of witnesses, he's not talking about two sets of witnesses. In both the cases, he's actually talking about one set, but he's talking about two separate time junctures compared to one separate time juncture. So if the single set of witnesses testify on the Tuesday to the theft on the Sunday, and then on Wednesday they come separately to testify about the slaughter on the Monday, if they invalidated as far as the slaughter is concerned, okay, then the earlier testimony regarding the theft remains valid, because then, Gavin, what has to happen is that witnesses, it's seen as two separate utterances. And unless other witnesses can prove that they weren't there at that location, you can't throw it out. But if a single set of witnesses testify in one juncture, in one sitting, even, Kevin, if there was the slaughter on the Monday, but the theft took place on the Sunday, but they came on the Tuesday and testified in one utterance about the theft and the slaughter, at that point, it's seen as one testimony. So any part of it that's incorrect is the whole testimony is thrown out. Does that make sense? Okay, it's pretty clear, guys. Any questions before we go on? It's very straightforward.
Is this a Tanaic discussion?
Yeah. So it's very similar to the Amorite discussion, except it's a little bit more subtle in that respect. So having established that basically, guys, the dispute between Rav Yossi and the rabbis concerns the case where one set of witnesses, only one set, testified about the theft and the slaughter at the same time, versus testifying about the theft and the slaughter at two separate testimony junctures. The Gemara now develops the basis for its suggestion that the point of dispute between Rav Yossi and the Bava Kamma, which is the anonymous opinion of all the rabbis generally, well, the rabbi that agrees with the rest of the rabbis, is the issue disputed by Abai and Rava, and it's going to give it now. And they, the rabbis of the academy who sought to demonstrate that the dispute between Abai and Rava is a matter of Tanaic dispute, assume that all the Tanaim of the Bryce agree that the one statement made after another within the time required for an utterance is viewed as part of the same utterance. Meaning that the two statements are considered one long statement, because the testimony occurred within one time junction, one day. So the testimonies regarding the theft and slaughter are considered part of a single testimony. So obviously, if the one's invalidated, the other's invalidated. Now, it's not that they argue. Okay, so guys, they're arguing about this specific point, that the rabbis hold that a conspiring witness is disqualified only from this point onwards, which would mimic who, guys? The rabbis would mimic Rav or Abai.
No, that will be Rav.
Sorry, Rava, not Rav. My mistake. Rava. I said Rav. I meant Rava. Because you've got Rav and Shmuel and Abai and Rava. So the rabbis are holding, Abai is holding up the rabbis, the general rabbis, that hold that a Zomeim witness is disqualified only from now and onward. Now, guys, just remember that the halacha actually ends up following Abai, that you can disqualify retroactively. So Gavin and I are on the same page in terms of logic, Gavin, by the way. You must know. So anyway.
It makes more sense.
Yeah, it does. So because how do you trust them? Despite the fact that there's no evidence against them. So Rava and the rabbis hold that a Zomeim witness is disqualified from now and onwards. And since it's only from the time that they're exposed that they're disqualified as Zomimim, but not active to the time of their testimony, it follows that on the slaughter where they have been exposed as false witnesses because there were other witnesses that said they couldn't have been at that place, they pay the threefold payment, guys. But with respect to the testimony on the theft for which they have not been exposed as Zomimim, they're not Zomimim. So, Gavin, even if they're lying, you would still need witnesses to say they were in another place to cancel out the testimony. And therefore, the accused pays the double payment for the theft. Okay? So, although their testimonies regarding both the theft and the slaughter were said at the same time within an utterance, since their disqualification as conspiring witnesses on account of their testimony regarding the slaughter doesn't take effect retroactively at that time, there's no reason to invalidate their testimony regarding the theft, because they haven't been rendered zomamim on account of it, according to Rashi. There's no witnesses that are saying they weren't there. But Rav Yossi holds like, Abaya holds like Rav Yossi, and Gavin and I understand it, that a zomaim witness is disqualified retroactively, Kevin, from the moment he testifies falsely. And that since it's from the moment that they testified that they became disqualified, when they're rendered conspiring witnesses with regards to their testimony on the slaughter, they are also rendered zomamim with respect to their testimony on the theft as well. Okay? So that's not to say, Gavin, this is a very important point, right? That they are rendered zomamim on the theft and will have to pay the double payment, because there's no evidence for that. The punishment imposed of the reciprocal penalty on the hazama is only when there's witnesses to say that they weren't at that location testifying to the theft. But what that means is they don't have to then pay the double penalty, and the person accused wouldn't have to pay the double penalty either, because their testimony is invalidated. So again, the Adam Zomamim don't have to pay because there are no conspiring witnesses on the theft. They can't be proven to be. We just don't trust their track record. So their testimony is thrown out, but we don't make the thief pay the double payment on that account, but they don't pay the reciprocal penalty for the thief, for the theft part, only for the slaughter, because there were witnesses against them to say you couldn't have viewed the slaughter on the Monday you were with us. So that makes sense, Gavin. It's the best of both worlds.
I understand that. I want to ask you just one thing. So the penalty then in that case will be, is it just 3 or is it just 3 that they pay then?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just 3, yeah. Okay.
So the punishment imposed, the reciprocal penalty, is only implemented if they're shown to be elsewhere in the alleged incident. And they haven't been shown that in regard to the theft, but we don't trust them, Gavin. So they don't have to pay the penalty because they can't be proven, but you still don't trust their character. So rather it means that they rendered disqualified witnesses with regards to the theft on account of them having been rendered zomamim with regards to the slaughter. Now that being said, you must know, obviously, if there are 2 sets of witnesses, it goes without saying that it's a different case. So, in other words, what we're saying is here, if you make a statement after another statement, within the time required for an utterance, it's viewed as part of the same utterance. And bottom line, that once it's been established that one was a false witness in regard to that part of the testimony, your entire testimony becomes discredited as that of a false witness because it's seen as one testimony. Okay. Now, Kevin, I know you have got